Dan told me 10 minutes or so, so I'll give you 10 minutes. And if you have any follow-up questions or comments or objections, I just gave a presentation on St. Simeon, the New Theologian, and spiritual perception. So as Dan might have told you, I have published, co-edited a book on Perceiving Things Divine with Oxford University Press, in which what we tried to do is we tried to connect the idea of spiritual perception with recent literature in cognitive science and ecology and a wide range of disciplines. And so that's really been interesting for the last year to see the kinds of feedback we're getting and the topics. And as you know, the journal that Dan is editing did a special issue, 2 special issues on this. So let me just say a little bit about this whole business of training and perception. There's a writer by the name of Matthew Crawford who says the following: when we become competent in some particular field of practice, our perception is disciplined by that practice. We become attuned to pertinent features of a situation that would be invisible to a bystander. So that's a very short way of saying something like this. In life, as any of you know, with time, people become better at being more attuned to certain features. So a bird watcher, a wine taster, somebody who goes to dog shows and evaluates a dog show, people who work in medicine, people who work in art. My good friend Paul Gavriluk wrote an essay on developing perception as it relates to art, the capacity to see particular patterns and particular things when you go into a gallery. There's several other examples of this idea of training and perception. All it really means is something like this, that perception as it's been traditionally viewed or determined or is largely passive, right? And so the assumption is that perception cannot be trained, right? But in reality, what we've learned about perception is something like this, that our antecedent desires, our training, our capacities, excuse me for the language that I'm about to use, in cognitive science, they call this cognitive penetration. What they mean by that is that the perceptual capacities that we have are penetrated by antecedent beliefs, desires, experiences, and so on. So in reality, perception is not merely passive. It may be that actually the antecedent capacities, desires, and so on are so entailed in the act of perception that there is and can be what we call training and perception. And this happens in spirituality with spiritual direction. It happens as people learn to properly attune themselves to the world, to their desires, to their thoughts. Those desires and thoughts can be redirected in such a way that it actually impacts the way we perceive the world, or the way we perceive our neighbor, or the way we perceive God or the world. There's a really great book on this that talks about, it's written by a New Yorker who says, kind of goes through the city of New York and says, there's so many things that we don't notice, not because they're not there, it's because we are so attuned to seeing the world in particular ways. And with time, perhaps in redirection, we're able to maybe rethink the way in which we view the world. And so when I think of perceptual training, I think of training that enables one to be alert, training that enables one to make fine-grained perceptual judgments, training that enables people to know the difference between what's peripheral and what's central. And so there's a sense in which we have to be trained, right, or regulated in order to properly attune ourselves to what is in fact salient, as opposed to just taking an extraneous, big, bunches of pieces of information and never being able to perceive what is in fact perennial or what is in fact important. And so a metaphor that's used in cognitive science is the metaphor of spotlighting. So when we think of a spotlight, we're thinking of putting our attention on one thing, right? Now, the problem with that is if you spotlight, you might overlook some things. So the worry here is maybe spotlighting can lead to confirmation bias. You only see what you're looking for. But we would never accuse experts of confirmation bias, at least initially, because we would say the extent to which, for example, there are people in the world that are tuatara experts. Tuatara looks like a lizard, but it's not. And it's not even in the realm of a lizard. So if you had two people in the backyard, one that's an expert in being an expert of tuataras, that person would be able to perceive really quickly the difference between a lizard and a tuatara, whereas the non-expert would not. So in some cases, when it's sort of determined by antecedent expectations that you so badly want to be true. So the point here is not to say that all antecedent, experiences and so on are good. It's simply to say our ability to sort of see what's selectively and saliently the case is important. And I just got back from a conference in New York. It was really a workshop with Orthodox Jews and Christians on forgiveness. And it was just fascinating in the room to sort of attend to what people were actually saying as opposed to what I wanted them to say. And that was really instructive in terms of maybe backing off a little bit, attuning myself, and then maybe properly hearing what someone is saying. And I think I'm preaching to the choir when I say our world so badly needs people to be more attentive. Our world so badly needs for people to be trained in such a way that they can know the difference between getting caught up in the moment and being able to see through perhaps distractions and to see through perhaps loaded assumptions. So the point of training of perception is not merely that antecedent experiences and so on are important. It's that by attending to things in a careful way, and there's a place for the role of emotion, a place for virtue, and all these kinds of really interesting aspects of our selfhood that enable us to maybe see, the quote in Matthew 5:8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So I think the assumption there is a purity of heart, in this case, is probably more like stability, enables you not to be overwhelmed by the moment, enables you to actually see things for what they truly are. And it takes time, it takes training. And this is the great ascetical traditions, right? When you think of asceticism, the point there is to end up being put properly in the right place so that what you're desiring is no longer simply crudely momentary impulses, but actually long-term habitual ways of seeing the world. So Dan, I think I've kept it to 10 minutes or less. And so are there any questions or comments that anyone has about this? And if you're, one last thing, if you're interested in this project, there are plenty of versions of this, but there are comparatively people who are now working on this in Islam and Judaism and Christianity and Buddhism. And so ours has been largely framed by the Christian tradition. But if you're interested, email me, contact me. If you want to have an extended conversation, feel free to do that.